Welcome to episode number 197 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast. We are recording on March the 5th, 2023. My name is Eric. I'm the host of the show based in Southern Ontario, a hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator, and computer geek. As a first responder, witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events and started a small preparedness company, if I could talk, to help people get better prepared for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
And my name is Jeff. I am based in Central Ontario. I'm a target shooter, ham radio operator, general overall handyman, and weather nerd.
I'm Pierre. I'm a tactical beard owner, based t-shirt guru, government critiqued, and the reason we normally have to hit the explicit button.
All right. And this evening, we've got Patrick Hardy with us, the founder and CEO of Hytropy Disaster Management, the largest full-service small business and family disaster management company in the U.S. A certified emergency manager, certified risk manager, master business continuity professional, and FEMA master of exercise. He's has an extensive experience working in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors in disaster management, from micro businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Patrick is considered the world's leading expert in small business disaster preparedness. In the summer of 2012, he became the youngest person and the first business owner ever selected as the National Private Sector Representative for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. He's worked with tens of thousands of organizations and families, including high net worth family offices. He's been featured expert on family disaster preparedness on Good Morning America, PA Live, NBC, and CBS affiliates throughout the U.S. A seasoned disaster professional, he's assisted the American Red Cross during multiple major activations, including the Emergency Operations Center, at a site director at Louisiana State EOC as a shelter manager. He's been a cross-trained and certified hazmat emergency communications, homeland security policy, and terrorism. Patrick began his career in EMS ambulance first response, eventually becoming a visiting instructor to the National EMS Academy's paramedic program, and wrote the chapters on disaster preparedness, terrorism, and weapons of mass destruction for the new Advanced Emergency Medical Technician textbook for the use in the U.S. national curriculum. His first book, Design Any Disaster, The Revolutionary Blueprint to Master Your Next Crisis or Emergency, is slated to be released this Tuesday, March the 7th. You can also pre-order it on Amazon. I'll throw a link in the notes here.
Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the two tonight.
That's going to be fantastic.
And if you want to support the show and keep the Canadian Prepper Podcast on the air, buy some swag. We have both the Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt and the tactical Velcro patch. You can find them both at www.prepperpodcast.ca. All proceeds help keep the lights on and the backup generator fueled.
If you're enjoying the show, please take a few minutes and like us on Facebook and submit a review on iTunes. Also, we want your feedback, good or bad, or just a topic you want us to cover. You can email us at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
Hey, you got through all of it this week.
Yeah.
Well done. Well done. All right. So we've got some emergency preparedness content for you in this episode. I know that is strange for episode 197. We're going to start off with some recent news. We're going to update you on our personal preps. Then we're going to get into the main topic. We've got an interview with Patrick from Hytropy Disaster Management. So it's going to be a great episode. Let's move into the news. So I've got an article here from highriver.ca, and it's touching on High River advancing emergency preparedness through staff training and local partnerships. So it's kind of neat. Again, I like to touch on some local things in the news if we can, instead of the big multinational stuff. So this is a town in Alberta, and they're just starting to up their preparedness and get some people trained up and get some partnerships established for being ready for a big major disaster and making sure that everybody's trained up ahead of time. So it's always nice to see.
Yes.
And I've got a news article here, again, kind of around the preparedness part of it. There are still all kinds of people stranded from the California blizzard that went on. I was going to say strange, but it's not strange that the local officials are now admitting that they were unprepared for this epic mountain blizzard that have left many people trapped and desperate. It says the San Bernardino County officials acknowledged they were unprepared for these back-to-back storms, leaving many people stranded for more than a week amid gas leaks and diminishing food supplies, and that the snowplows they usually use to clear the mountain roads were ineffective, and a bunch of communities, they're still snowed in. Just to give you some numbers, in the San Bernardino Mountains, a town of Running Springs got 12 feet of snow. Big Bear Lake got 11 feet, and Lake Arrowhead got a little over 9 feet. So, you know, they're still digging out, trying to get things out there. I do have a little issue they put in with one of the wordings that they put in the article. I think they were kind of trying to say, well, it was our fault, but it wasn't. They complained that, well, we didn't know this blizzard was coming for weeks. We only had 24 to 36 hours notice. The main storm came on a Wednesday night to Thursday. And on our podcast on the Sunday night, I was already alluding to the fact that there was the big potential for this blizzard to come. So they knew it was coming. They just didn't think it was probably going to be as bad as it was. You know, part of the other problem is they've got areas where they're dropping food or dropping supplies and stuff. But somebody made the comment, yeah, okay, it's 2 miles from where I live and there's 4 feet of snow on the road. How am I supposed to get there to get my supplies? So again, it goes back to, again, like always we say, got to have stuff in supply. And, you know, we usually say 72 hours, but I like to say if you don't have 2 weeks of stock where you're buried, you don't have enough. So.
And I know a lot about that, actually, because my parents live in San Bernardino. They used to live at Big Bear Lake, right near Lake Arrowhead. Now they live at in a town called Oak Glen, California. It is it's about 3,500 feet, where Big Bear Lake is about 7,400 feet. So they got, you know, they called me, you know, because I didn't hear from them for a couple of days. You know, I texted them saying, you know, be prepared, the usual things. And they said, well, yeah, I'm sorry we didn't, you know, we hadn't called or anything. You know, we got about 6 feet worth of snow. And I said, and my father is, he's a very short guy. He's about 5'5". And he said, I walked outside and he literally stepped into, because they actually live on a sloped hill. And at the top of it, he put his foot down and he literally said the snow was still over his head. It was over 6 feet. So it was one of the most claustrophobic experiences he's had in his entire life. And keep in mind, this is somebody who's from Hawaii. My dad's from Hawaii. So he's like, I'm not used to anything like this. I've never seen snow like that before. And they said that literally people were, they live in a higher end community, and they were saying people literally were taking, you know, like the normal shovels people have. They were just using like shovels to shovel the snow off, because that's an area that they don't necessarily always get enough snow where they would have to plow their own driveways.
Jeez.
Yeah, they were saying when I was mentioning it on the podcast before, they were calling for snow. They said in areas that hadn't seen a flake in 40 years. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
That'd be a definite shock then.
Well, yeah, and you know, I was saying to my parents, I was like, so so I said, you know, you guys doing okay? You have everything? And you know, they're going, yeah. There's only one problem. I said, what is it? They're like, we can't get our Starbucks, so we can't have any of that. So now I know this is a disaster, because I can't even get Uber Eats to drive up here.
Yeah, if Uber Eats and Starbucks is closed, you know you got a problem.
yeah.
Got it.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on to what we've done lately for preps.
I haven't done much. I did some food prep. I messed around with my canner again, just trying to get myself all prepped up for that. Yeah, that's about it for me for this week. Kind of slow.
Fair enough. For myself, I've been playing around. I know this is going to be shocking for everybody. Playing around with some ham radio stuff. So this little guy here, little handheld. I've been playing around with APRS, so automatic packet reporting system. So it's literally just some data packets over radio frequency that'll send things like location. You can send text messages. I sent a text message actually to Scott, who decided to not show up tonight from it, and he's able to reply back to me just because why not? It's kind of fun to goof around with, and could really be useful in an emergency type situation. Kyle in the chat there, yeah, radio talk, shocker, I know, right? But it's kind of neat to play around with, because if I'm in an area where there is no cell reception, but I can still access a repeater that has this technology available to it, I can still send a text message. It can go to anybody. They don't have to be a ham radio operator. It doesn't matter. And they can reply back to me again without needing a ham radio license. And then it does some other neat stuff with GPS locations, weather locations, all that kind of stuff. So just kind of diving into it now, and I'm sure I'll have more updates on it later. But I've been playing around with it for about a week now, and it's been fun.
So is it a more specific thing that you mentioned, that specific repeaters might have to have something? Is it a common thing for most repeaters?
Not all of them. It's actually more popular in the States from what I've seen. There's a lot more repeaters in the US versus Canada. There's a couple here in town, but there's a lot of ham radio guys in town here too that like to play around with all kinds of everything. And there's a repeater here that's pretty close that I can access and utilize. After that, anything north of here, they're spread out. And not all of them are publicly posted either. I'll find out as I'm exploring the province with this now. It transmits, everybody uses the same frequency, so it doesn't matter where I am, it's always going to be the same frequency. So I'll find other repeaters as I go. If there's other people that just set them up and not publish them, but I'll be able to document it as I travel around. But
nice.
For the most part, it's different technology that's not on every single repeater, but it's on some in the area here.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's I see Scott's in the live chat. Didn't want to join us tonight in the show, but it's like T9 on my flip phone. 100%, it is like T9. For those of you that remember T9, but it's a form of communication that can be used in a bad situation, right? So, and it's like I said, you can do all kinds of GPS stuff as well. So I can, if I want, put my location up on a map that's accessible on the internet. I can contact other APRS radios in the area and send my location or send messages back and forth just to those radios. So if you do have other people in your group that are ham licensed, you can shoot messages back and forth if you're within frequency range of each other. So that's kind of neat, something different to play with. And yes, I'm a radio nerd. I get it.
Yes. We've got not too much either. Pretty busy with work. Got a little bit of food prep done for when me and Mel go off to our honeymoon, for us as well as the daughters that she's staying. Wedding preps. Oh my God, we have so much stuff in the house. And then working on some extra computer skills. Computer work for work. So it looks like a few things are changing. So a few extra things. So dabbling on the IT side, which is kind of fun and confusing at the same time.
Do I have an episode for you?
Yes. I know.
We did a cybersecurity episode a little while ago, Patrick, and it's freaked Pierre out ever since.
Yeah, Pierre's never been the same.
Nope. Awesome. Well, with that, let's get right into it, because I know everybody's probably itching to hear from Patrick and what he's got to say, and I know I'm certainly interested to hear about your history and your book and everything you've got to share with us. But let's start out with some of the basics. If you could just tell us about your company and your preparedness journey.
Well, it all started when I was on the swim team in high school. That's where it all began. I was swimming. It's so funny because I used to swim the 500 and the 1000, which just in case you're not really familiar with swim teams, those are the two most unpopular events for anyone to swim in, because you're basically doing laps and more laps and more laps. And all they do is they put this little, it's like a sign, and they slip it in the water to let you know what lap you're in. Because I can't tell you the number of times I'd be swimming. I'm like, what lap am I on? Oh, I'm on lap 37. Okay, good. At least I know. I got to keep pacing myself till I get to lap 66. And so at the end of the swim season, one of my coaches said, "Hey, listen, there's a bunch of guys who are going out to become a lifeguard. You want to try being a lifeguard? And I said, okay, I'll do it. So of course I went, and all these guys who were, and I'm serious. The guys I swam with were incredible swimmers. I mean, these guys were really good on the 50, the 100, so really short distances. But to be a lifeguard, you had to swim across a lake. You had to run across the beach. You had to go in the water, and you had to swim across the lake. And of all these guys who were like almost Olympic quality swimmers, I was the only one that made it. And so I ended up becoming a lifeguard that season. So I was a lifeguard. And at the end of the season, a bunch of the lifeguards said, we're thinking about going to EMT school. So like, all right, I'll go do that. So I went and became an EMT and so on and so on. And I went to college, and ended up happening was, I graduated and I discovered that I didn't have a real cause, because I studied political science, international political science, and because I wanted to become a professor originally. And so I kind of examined it and said, you know what? Everyone has a cause. They want to abolish nuclear weapons, or they want to end world hunger, or they want to end genocide. And I said, I don't have one of those. And then right after Hurricane Katrina happened, I said, you know what? That's solvable in my lifetime. I think that's solvable. If I commit to true emergency preparedness, that can be solved. And I don't think that the government running everything for people is the answer. So if we get some fresh ideas on it. So I wrote a letter to the governor of Louisiana. I said, listen, I'm a nobody. You have no idea who I am. I graduated from college. I did this. and I would love to work for you. I got a phone call, and the governor said, someone from the governor's staff said, okay, great. Would love to have you. So why don't you come move here? We'll give you room, board, $1,500 a month. And you work for us 100 hours a week. How's that sound? And I said, sounds great. So when you're 22, that sounds great.
Sounds fantastic.
So
at 22.
You go out, you're like
100 hours a week.
Yeah, I was working. I worked for the chief of staff. And so right after Hurricane Katrina, I mean, you can imagine the frenetic activity in Baton Rouge. I mean, just the atmosphere and the pressure that was being placed on people, right? So there was, I was working, and because, like you, Eric, I'm a ham operator too. So,
awesome.
I told them, I said, I can do anything you want me to do. And they would say, hey, would you do a shift in the EOC? And then I trained with the Red Cross. Hey, would you go be a shelter manager for a little while? Or, would you do that? And I literally said yes to anything they wanted. And it was the best education I ever got. Every single hour I worked, I learned a ton about how government interacts with the private sector, how you work with a population that's in for a great transit and upheaval. What do you do when civil administration is absent? I mean, one issue, as a matter of fact, I ended up doing a rotation with the Attorney General's office. And get this, one of the biggest problems they had was, what do you do if you get bit by your neighbor's dog and you can't sue them because small claims court is closed? So these are the kinds of strange things that you think in a disaster, you're worried about that. But you know what? Eventually it stops being a disaster for everybody. And it's like, I have to live my normal life somehow. And so when these courts are absent, these are things emergency management has to answer. So I ended up going back to there. I went to graduate school in Europe. I opened a business. I won a business prize when I was in Great Britain, and I came back and I opened a business, and I started with one client, and I have over 300,000 small business clients. So I work with restaurants and bars and nursing homes and underwater sea cable operations and alligator farms and you name it, Eric, you name it. I've written disaster plans for it. Mobile home parks, RVs. Awesome. It's awesome. It's the coolest job in the world. I love my job. It's cool.
That's awesome. Now, are you working only with like U.S. companies and U.S. Citizens, or are you branched out internationally, or how does that work?
About 5 years ago, I'd worked a little bit internationally. We'd done some work in Europe, and so European companies would reach out to us, some Canadian companies. I actually work with a number of companies based in the U.S. that have operations in Canada. So that's particularly on the East Coast, where a lot of them are over there. So, but about 5 years ago, we got an email from a business. They are a hair salon in Zimbabwe.
Really?
Don't ask me how I ever got on their radar, but they called and said, we know that you know how to do this. Would you write our disaster plan, please? And I was like, no, my disaster planners, I hire a number of planners. I go, my disaster planners, you're not right. You are not writing this plan. I am writing this, even though I've written plans in a long time. I just go, I'm writing this plan because I want to say I wrote a disaster plan for a hair salon in Zimbabwe. And one of the biggest threats, actually, you guys will actually find this interesting. The biggest threat, can you guess what you think the biggest threat to their business is? Do you want to take a guess? Take a guess what they identified. They said, this is the biggest threat we face to our business. So what do you think? Take a crack at it.
Let's say an animal of some sort.
Inflation.
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 Because Zimbabwe has hyperinflation, right? Zimbabwe, it's like $1 is like 1 billion Zimbabwe. I'm not even sure what the currency type is there, but they dealt with hyperinflation. So we literally developed a plan to help them to learn how to barter. So I said, okay, if you deal with hyperinflation, here's how you barter. And I wrote a continuity plan that shows them how to barter for hair services in Zimbabwe.
That's
awesome.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Talk about a story.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Disaster planning is not allowed to be this fun, but it just is.
Hey. That's cool. Zimbabwe. Any other international stories, or is that kind of?
I work with a beekeeping operation. I work with a beekeeping operation in South America. So I work with a number of beekeepers, and one of the things was that one of the apiaries I worked with. That's what a bee yard's called, an apiary. So I had an apiary I was working with in Louisiana, and this guy calls me up one day and he goes, "Listen, I own an apiary down in South America, in Brazil." And so he says, would you be willing to write a plan for these guys? And I said, yeah, of course. I want to write a plan for an apiary in Brazil. I'm up for that. And so he says, okay. And so I didn't actually go there. I actually haven't visited there before, but they took pictures. They did the usual things. We figured out their evacuation routes. And I love what Kyle says, because that's totally true. You've got to have a ton of EpiPens, man. I mean, but I was talking to them. I was talking to these guys about, literally running a bee yard, you have to have all kinds of suits. And then one of the disasters that these guys deal with, the biggest disaster a bee yard has to deal with, is what's called requeening. It means that if the queen of a hive actually dies, that essentially signs the death warrant. And I didn't know this. And I live right by UC Davis, which is a very big bee and agriculture university. But if the queen dies, that's essentially a death warrant for the rest of the hive. And right now, with colony collapse syndrome and some other things, I did not know this. There are what we call queen brokers. That is all they do for a living. They are brokers you can call, and they will literally ship you a queen, and that you like literally a bee, they will ship to you. Yeah. And that queen, you will try to reintroduce it. And I learned the protocols of how to place a queen bee in and introduce a queen into a new hive. So that is the ultimate continuity plan. I said, you know what? I was able to supplement nature somehow. I just felt like I was like fixing this gap in Mother Nature somehow. But it was just really cool. Yeah. But it's these kinds of continuity solutions. I just love it so much. I just love being creative and trying to find unique ways of saying, how can I make your business more efficient? I don't care what it is you do for a living, whatever it is, you just try and find a really cool way to say, this is how I can make sure that you can make it through any disaster.
That's interesting. And I can see how that'd be a fun challenge too, because you'll have all kinds of different companies and different individuals coming to you with a very unique set of circumstances and operating procedures. And then you get to say, okay, what's the worst possible thing that's going to happen? And how do we fix it and be ready for it? That's awesome.
Exactly. And on top of it, it's just fun to learn. I tell you, and I know this is true, this is as true in Canada as it is in the US. It never ceases to amaze me how people have figured out how to make a living in this world. I can't believe people's creativity. It blows me away. The things that people have discovered about how to make a living in this world, I just go, okay, we'll do it, whatever it is. Because that's the reason why I really started my business originally, because I said, listen, after Hurricane Katrina, Walmart has billions with a B, billions of dollars to recover their stores. Big, massive operations have access to public equity markets. Small business has access to what? An SBA loan, Small Business Administration loan. That's in the US. That's primarily where they get their loans from, right? These are like $30,000 loans. They go, a $30,000 loan to reopen a restaurant. I mean, I worked in a restaurant when I was a teenager. That's not enough. I mean, when you're dealing with these kinds of things. So I said, there has to be an avatar and an apostle for small businesses, and it just doesn't exist. So since it doesn't exist, I'm going to invent one. That's going to be me. Hey. And so I just decided, and it's just been a really fun journey. Just like you guys, when you're like, you know, when you're talking with people's interesting lifestyles, and you just say, how can I develop a disaster framework that works for this particular family or this particular company or this particular person's life circumstances? That just what makes it so much fun.
Nice. That's awesome. I didn't mention before, but I'll take a second to mention it now. Everybody who's watching live, if you've got questions for Patrick, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get them to him to get you an answer. As far as I know, this will probably be one that a lot of people want to know, is what kind of advice do you give out to new people that are coming to you saying, hey, you know, I'm a small family, or you know, we're just trying to get started out in this disaster preparedness thing. What's some basic advice that you like to give people that ask you who are just starting out?
First thing I tell them is I say, I want you to tell me physically, mentally, spiritually, socially, and financially, what are the most important things that make your family continue to operate? Because what I try to define with families is what are the needs and what are the wants? Because I try to develop and identify what are the needs. Once I've developed the needs, it doesn't mean I ignore the wants. Because I say to people, like, actually, I was joking around with my parents. I said, you know what? One of the things we should have done is we should have actually given you a cappuccino maker or a latte maker, because if you can't get your Starbucks during a blizzard, and if that to you is enough of a want, and you guys understand this very well, food and drink, getting the things that eating food that you're familiar with, eating food that is important to you, drinking things that are familiar to you, and ensuring that your body stays in the same rhythm that it does day in and day out are just as important. I actually have a client, they're fanatical chess players. They love playing. They're not pros or anything, they're grandmasters or whatever, that, you know, any of that. They're not Gary Kasparov, but they love to play chess, and they play chess online. With people. And I say, well, if there's a power outage and you can't do it and you can't play chess, would that bother you? And they said, yes. So we figured out a way so that they could play correspondence chess via text message. And I said, that's your backup. And some people would say, what, of all the things in disasters you're worried about, they're chess playing? And I said, to them, chess is important. Same with people who have certain, they have certain hobbies or things that are important to them. People who have, their faith is really important to them. We try to develop backup systems in case they said they have the spiritual support that is important to them. So I don't just talk about, and I know it's important. I know it's important to talk about things physically, make sure we have food, water, all that stuff. But what I tell people is don't touch any of that stuff. Let's figure out first what your wants and your needs are. Then let's start defining what we need to get for you. Because otherwise, if we just go to the store and say, let's just get the red backpack, let's just buy that, and then, hey, we're prepared. And I say to them, that's not necessarily preparedness for you. Because then what I end up doing is I interrogate them a little bit, and I say, for your 3-year-old, what's important for them? Is important to them that they have this toy, they have this thing, and they go, oh yeah, is that included in your disaster program? Oh no, I don't have any of that. Well, we have to include those things. Same with pets and everything else. So whatever's important to them, that's the first thing I do. And I tell people is take an inventory of it. And I talk about it in the book, exactly how to do that, is to how to take an inventory of your life and evaluate what's important to you.
And I'm on that 100% from the aspect of familiarity and what it is you do, and just keep doing that. Mm-hmm. And just the amount of stress that's going to take away when something bad is going on. If it's a 10-minute, I'm away from this bad thing that's going on, and I'm going to sit down and have my cappuccino or my Starbucks or whatever. I'm going to play my chess game, and I'm going to get my mind off of what's going on, and I'm going to refocus. I mean, that can mean the world to somebody.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point that you've got of just focusing on some of the wants and the comfort things. Because in a
Mhm.
really bad situation, that's going to ground you and take you out of that bad situation for a bit and get you focused on something positive. And then you can deal with the disaster or whatever it is that's going on around you. But I think that's a really valid point. That's something that a lot of people forget about. They focus and they hyper focus on, I need the stockpile of food. I need the stockpile of water. I need that magical 72-hour bag that I can buy from whatever supplier that makes me feel like I'm ready. But they don't focus on the things that will help them get through and keep a sense of normal. And yeah, everybody completely forgets about that part of it. That's a fantastic point.
I tell the people who actually wrote about this in the book. There's actually a story I tell. I was doing a disaster plan for a very large RV park in the United States, so one of the largest in the world. And and when I was finishing up, there were some folks who were there who were saying, "Hey, listen, we're going to be traveling the U.S. via RV for the next 9 months. So we bought this disaster backpack. Would you be willing to just take a look at it? You don't have to run our program or anything. Would you just look through the backpack?" And I said, "Okay, sure." Because I'm a sucker for that stuff. I go, "Okay, sure." So they bring me the backpack. And of course, the backpack has never been opened. It is still closed, and it still has that, that zip tie they always put up to make sure people unzip it in the store and steal the stuff. So it has the zip tie on there. So they said, "Okay." And I said, "All right." So I take the scissors and I cut the thing off. And then, I take, and I do this to audiences all the time. It always makes a big impact. I take their backpack and I literally unzip the top and I turn it upside down and I dump the whole thing out on the table. And so I was looking at everything and stuff looked fine. And then there was the infamous food pellet. So I said, it's one of those K ration types. And so I said, okay, and that's fine for some folks. And so what I said was, we're looking at the difference. They said, okay, there's the whistle. You know how it is. There's the whistle. That looks good. The little 80-cent flashlight, which, by the way, I'm not really sure that flashlight would have ever really worked. They had batteries for it and technically worked. I would never use it, but via con Dios to anyone who can. And I said, okay, fine. And so we took the pellet. And so I took a knife that I carried on me and I cut the pellet in half and I broke it up, and they were shocked. They just were like, "What are you doing? Why are you breaking that open?
That's a whole day behind on my supplies now."
Right? I know, exactly. So we opened the thing up and I cut it into pieces, and they said, "So what's this?" And I said, "Lunch." And I said, "We're going to eat this right now."
Nice.
And they actually said, "We can't eat it." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "He's on a very specific diet. He has celiac disease. He cannot eat anything like this and that." And she actually had a health disorder that didn't allow her to eat. And there was like one of it's just a minor ingredient. It really wasn't that important. Most people aren't affected by it, but she, for some reason, was hypersensitive to it.
Right.
And said, "I couldn't eat it." And I said, "So let me ask you a question. Would you have been prepared?" And they said, "Absolutely not." And I said, "So let's get you food that would have prepared you correctly." So I went and I actually got them real food. I actually ended up shipping it to another RV park, which ironically, actually I'd done a disaster plan for that park too. It actually had it shipped to that place because I didn't want them to go around the country without the proper food. So when people are always saying, "Okay, thank you, red backpack manufacturer, you give me everything I need," I go, "No, don't assume that they've done that, because they are designing the disaster for you." That's why I called my book "Design Any Disaster," because you don't want them designing the disaster. You design the disaster, and that's how you take assertive control of it.
Yeah, I always say those red backpacks, as you describe them, great to kind of start out and get you sort of basics, but you got to build around it, customize it to you, and it's not a one stop, buy it, throw it in the car, throw it in the closet, and I'm ready for anything. It just that's what a lot of people do, right? They think they get that false sense of security with having that backpack that has been pre-made for them. And yeah, sure, it's better than nothing, but yeah, it's literally a start or like a gateway into preparedness. You've got something to build around now.
Right.
But going through it all and making sure that it's actually usable for you is key. Like you had just said there, Patrick, those two folks weren't able to eat the food that they had in the bag. that's not going to help you in a bad situation, right? That's going to actually hinder you because you think you've got what you need, and then you realize, I can't
Not
eat
in-
this. Now what?
Yeah.
Right?
Like,
It's almost worse
I
having
mean,
food in front of you can't eat. Right?
yeah.
Or food that'll actually get you sick, right?
That
Because
too,
it's
yeah.
one thing if the food doesn't taste good, right? Like there are people
Oh,
that
yeah,
have
of
tasted
course.
K rations and things
Yeah.
that go, okay, that doesn't taste good, but I'm not going to get sick. But it's another thing altogether when the food makes you really ill. And people with celiacs, like that's a real illness. Like you get that stuff that
That's a
makes you
big deal.
sick. That because you get faint. You have to go to an emergency room. So it's a big deal. You're absolutely right.
But how was the quality of can opener in the preparedness? So someone's gonna want to know about this.
Someone is going to want to know.
I will tell you this, that those things are just basically two pieces of metal that they stuck together with some machine and put it in there. I don't want to contradict anyone here, but one of the things that I actually tell families all the time is I say, you know how to start your emergency backpack? I got a perfect way to do it. Go to the store or go online and buy the best empty backpack you can find. Find a really cool empty backpack. Don't get the one from the store that's already. I mean, first of all, I hate those red backpacks anyway. They don't look good. They, I want to look cool. I mean, exactly. Get a backpack that's right for you. Because actually, Kyle asked a really interesting question. He says, "How many CO2 detectors do I need in a disaster?" And you know what the answer is? I have no idea. It depends on you, right? It depends on what you're. It depends on what you are dealing with, right? It's the same with everything else, right? If you need a really good can opener, you should go and buy a really good can opener. I agree with Pierre entirely, which by the way, can openers is one of those sort of staple items that I say to everybody. I say, listen, I don't care what you're dealing with. Always have a can opener because what's the thing? I discovered this when I was in college, and this was very true, which was I read a biography of Napoleon. And one of the things I realized was that Napoleon couldn't figure out how to feed his army going on a long march because he was planning to conquer not only Europe. He had very early, he was planning to conquer Russia. There was just no question in his head he was going to do that. Yeah. And he couldn't figure out how in the world he was going to feed these people. So he got an expert to develop what we now know as the can, which is those cans that we have in Campbell's soup, right? And when I was in Europe, I knew this guy. He was a flatmate in my dorms, and he literally took a can of beans. He took the can opener and he opened up the can, and then he literally, I make this up not. He took the can and he literally stuck the can directly on the stovetop, and he turned the stove up and he cooked the food in there. And he'd taken all the paper off, of course, and all that. But he told me that's the way they do it. And because essentially the technology of the can hasn't changed since the time of Napoleon. It's the same exact concept. And that's the reason why I tell people having canned foods, I'm not real big on a lot of generic advice, but that's one thing that I always say, there is no question that canned food will make a massive difference. So a can opener, especially a really good one, is worth the $5, $6, $7 investment. I mean, instead of the 20-cent one they stuck in there.
You've totally validated Brad now. We had an episode quite a while ago, and it went all on can openers eventually.
Yeah, it was just like this weird thing saying he had like 6 can openers, and it's just been a thing. And I was like, I'm gonna drop that. And then you just carried it, not even knowing, and I was like, this.
That was beautiful. That was perfect. Brad has totally been validated with that, and it's right. Like you're 100% right. You need a good one.
Well, tell Scott, I'm pulling up his spirit animal. I just pulled up his spirit animal right now, the can opener.
Yes. That's awesome. There is also, for Kyle's comment about the CO detectors, just to kind of fill you in a little bit as to why he's asking. That's a bit of a thing with the podcast as well. Alan, one of our usual panelists, is pretty adamant about making sure everybody's got working CO2 detectors. So sure. It's a pretty common theme interweaved throughout pretty much every episode since, when was his first one, episode 7 or 8, and it's been consistent all the way through. So it's not a random question. It's totally he's totally trying to stir the pot.
And I mean, how many do you need? You don't know. I mean, if you've got 6 appliances in your house that run on propane, natural gas, you'd probably want more than one. You'd want one if everything is electric in your house. The odds are probably slim to none compared to, natural gas, propane appliances, this, that, everything. But yeah,
Oh.
like you said, all depends on your scenario. So it's always something to take into consideration.
Depends on your lifestyle, everything else. I mean, like, Freya writes about, should you always have you should always have a nail clipper? I go, oh yeah, absolutely. If that's something that you think happens often enough to you, or you think that that's important, where you're like, you know what, I don't even run the risk of that thing, I would say absolutely put that in your backpack. No question about that. So my brother actually runs a hair salon. So like one of the things he always says, I always got to have like shampoo in there. I was like, no, we're not going there. Okay. We're not going that far. But what I told him is that, whatever matters to you, whatever you think is important to you. I mean, I've had people who've actually said, I'm going to keep actually hair clippers in my disaster backpack. And they actually have, they're like in a small, like leather bag, and they just use them when they're traveling. And so they just say they keep them in their disaster backpacks when they're home, because that's important to them.
That makes sense.
During COVID, I didn't have a haircut for 3 months. So I can understand.
Yep. Scott's got a question here in the live chat. Says that he's written a disaster plan, computer industry, but how do you write in flexibility in your plans?
First thing I do when I look at a disaster plan, as a matter of fact, my father was an information technology disaster recovery specialist in the 90s and late 80s and early 90s. And let me tell you how early he was involved in this. Okay, so he worked for a company, and they, he had been a computer programmer and a software engineer, and they said, well, we need you to develop a backup system, because we have all this software we're developing for video game companies and for all these different firms and things. Will you help us to back it up? He says, fine. So he does some research. He comes back. He says, okay, guys, we should buy a server. And they turned to him and said, what in the world's a server? I mean, that's how early this was. This is before anybody owned a server, and this is when Cisco was brand new, right? Because Cisco at that time was dominant in servers. I think they still are to some extent, but back then they were they were the only game in town. So he said, I have to create this because for us to be back in business in 10 days, that's what we have to have. So when you're talking about flexibility, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but one of the things I do when I look at plans is I say, does your plan allow for a variety of scenarios based on who's in charge? So for example, if you have a disaster plan in the computer industry and it says like this, only the information technology specialist can do X. Only the executive vice president can do Y. Only the managers can do Z. And I talk about this directly in the book, because I say that is how you create a disaster. When you have people who stand around and say, you know what, I can't do anything because the disaster plan says I can't do anything until the manager shows up. That happens so often that when I look at plans, because people, they'll hire me to consult. A big company will hire me. They'll say, will you look at our plan? It'll be this, 1,500 page behemoth. And I'll flip through it and I'll say, well, I have a recommendation right now. And they said, what is it? I said, I want you to eliminate all of the different titles in this disaster plan. They go, why would you do that? And I would say, because if you don't give people the ability to use the plan, you don't give them the flexibility to act in the plan, they can't be creative enough to help you recover. You have to involve them. If they're not involved, it isn't going to happen. And my specialty, of course, is small business. So we're not talking about companies with thousands of employees. We're talking about companies with 5 employees, 4 employees, 3 employees. So when I've written plans for smaller organizations, I say, you see that guy that you've hired, that cook you hired, he's going to be on your disaster team too. But if you don't empower him and say to him, if we have an emergency, I need your help, he's going to leave because he doesn't have any stake in what's going on here. And in IT, you guys were talking about cybersecurity. I was talking to the FBI about this last week, is that if small businesses don't have plans where anyone can start intervening, cybersecurity is based on seconds, not minutes, not hours, not days. It is seconds when people intervening that can make a major difference in it.
I think you really hit the point home there with a lot of people doing a plan. If they are at the point of writing up a plan or getting something in process for here's how I'm going to react to A disaster, B disaster, C disaster, people just always go to that. This person's going to be in command. This person's going to look after getting this. This person's going to look after getting that. and they never say if person B is not available, well, now what? If person A is not available, who does A's job? So that's, again, fantastic. Just here's the plan. Whoever gets here first, start the plan. don't wait for the designated leader to show up and say, you now need to go and do this and you need to go do that. Just start the plan, do something. But human nature will sit around and wait for that designated leader to show up to tell them to do A, B, and C, even though it's already written down. That's
You hit
fantastic.
Eric, you hit the major thesis of my book, which is my book basically says in most situations, people will follow the assumption, if I do nothing, someone else will handle it for me. That's what I talk about in every kind of disaster. And the example I talk about, right, is a guy having a heart attack at Disneyland. And I talk about the people around him that were standing around. But sometimes I get emails from people going, well, I would have intervened there. And I would say, well, but I can tell you in floods, in fires, in hurricanes, in blizzards, people say, I need to wait for the government to do this for me. I need FEMA to do this for me. I need the insurance company to do this for me. And I say, the minute you do that, you have become a bystander, because you are now saying, I don't take a position in my disaster response. I let someone else, quote, design it for me. That's why I called it the title I did, because I say, you're letting somebody else design how it's going to run. And then you wonder why you're disappointed at the end. I'd be disappointed too. I wouldn't want the insurance company to run my disaster response.
Yeah.
So it's, and Kevin's right. It's analysis paralysis. I mean, that's what ends up happening, is that you have so many people who are trying to say, well, should the firemen handle this and the law enforcement handle this and EMS guys will handle this? When I was an EMT and I worked on an ambulance, I can't tell you the number of times I'd show up on scene and people would say, oh, can you just start taking care of him? And I'd be like, well, yes, but I need you to tell me some things first. What's going on? And there'd be people screaming. I mean, I saw some really terrible things sometimes. And I'd be in car accidents. I would be like, you need to tell me more about this person, who they are, and what's happening. Because I have to make a case history as I'm treating this person. I can't start an IV till I know what's going on. You know what I mean? They can't necessarily communicate. But people will just stand by and do nothing. I mean, they'll just literally stand there. And I say, in hurricanes, I mean, and you guys read the news all the time. So the first thing I would ask you is that how many times have you or I or the people who are hearing this, how many times have you read a news article a month or 2 months post-disaster and it says, people complaining that, insurance company X didn't do the right thing, or FEMA didn't show up on time? What's going on in Ohio? With the train accident, with the hazmat spill. I don't know if you guys have been talking about that. I hope if you haven't, I hope you will, because I tell people all the time, I was a hazmat guy. I would say, you have to take your own responsibility for what's going on there. If you expect them to run your disaster response, you are going to be wholly disappointed. Is that sad? Yeah. Is it? But it's the way of the world. And if you don't take responsibility, never going to happen.
Yeah. And that's a big thing, right? Like at the end of the day, if you expect first responders to show up, or, whether it be paramedics, fire, police, government, whatever it is, I mean, depending on the scenario of the disaster, the cop, EMS, all those people are human. And most of them may have families and everything, that just being like, this is a little too much. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go take care of my family, Yes, it's part of their job and it's not, but like, just depending on the scenario, it's just like, this is taking a really bad turn that I'm unsure of everything. I'm going to go home with my family. Right. And then you're sitting there being like, well, where is he? Right. I'm like, the person's human. It's a tough decision for them to make, because obviously they're doing that job to help serve people. But I'm like, everybody has that point where they're just like, nah, I'm going home. Like, doesn't matter what job you do for a living or whatever. There is a point where everybody is going to start thinking about themselves first. And if you rely on a bunch of people to do stuff for you, right, there's going to be a point where all those people that are there and paid and they do this and they love their job to come and assist you, there's a point where they're going to be like, I can't. I need to go take care of my family. And then you're stuck left holding, the bag. So it's key to be able to understand the concept that, I'm not saying you need to be a surgeon qualified. You need to be a firefighter. You know, I'm not saying you need to do all that, but I'm like, just some basic things, right? Like someone with a heart attack could bleed. You know, have some crazy glue, close up that wound. You know, it's a disaster. Going to the hospital for 2 stitches is probably not the best. But, you know, just little things like that can help alleviate a lot of stress for the people that are doing that job, right? The people that are coming to help you, I'm sure they're just stressed to the max, right? Stretched thin. They don't know what to do. So just doing those little things for yourself is one of the best things you can do in the world.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And in fact, I talk to caregivers all the time. So people who are taking care of those who have sort of these pre-existing conditions. I can't tell you the number of times as an EMS professional, I would show up on scene, I roll up on scene, so myself, my partner, what's going on, and there's a person there, and I don't know what's happened. I don't know why this person is on oxygen. Do they have COPD? Do they have emphysema? Do they have this? Do they have that?
Yep.
And they won't have anything. The family members will just start shouting out things. Oh, yeah, he's got this. Oh, yeah, and he has this. Oh, and this. And then they'll hand me a bunch of pills as if I know what, you know, clopramazine is. Like, I mean, I don't know what, I mean, you get familiar with the basic stuff, but you don't know everything. But they'll start handing it to you and I'll say, that's not helpful. I mean, it's helpful when it gets to the emergency room, but at this point, it's a big deal. And one of the things that I wanted to say also, just kind of buttressing your point, I kind of totally agree with you, is that I train EMTs. I train them on a volunteer basis now. I go back to my old school. And the EMTs, I always pull the same trick. Okay, so I'll take a barrel, which I've used food coloring with, and I'll dump it over, and then I'll have a couple patients, a couple victims out, you know, actors and stuff, and they'll roll up on scene. The first thing they'll do is they'll jump out of the ambulance and they'll start running towards the patient. And I go, you both are now victims as well. You both are now victims of the spill. And they go, well, what are you talking about? I heard people screaming. That's my job. And I go, you have to protect yourself first. If you don't, you're now part of the problem. And Pierre, what experienced responders do, and you know this absolutely, you guys all know this, which is they will not do that. They'll walk up on scene and they'll be like this. I mean, they don't want to, but they're going to be like this until they say, once the scene's safe, then I'll come. It happens with criminal responses all the time. I mean, I've seen it. I can't tell you the number of times where we're on a scene where there was an active criminal agent involved. Not always a shooting. Could be a person with a knife, could be a person who has psychiatric problems, and literally will stand by until law enforcement goes on the radio and says, okay, guys, you're good to go. Suspects in custody or suspects neutralized. You can go in there. But until that time, I'm not going to go in it because you know why? In the end, I need to have a paycheck. I got a family. I got a cat that likes me most of the time. so I want to go back. I want to go back home. So that's the whole point. So
yeah, you bring up another really good point there where people in a disaster situation just kind of run either away from it if you're in emergency response towards it, but you don't always take that time to step back and assess with what you're actually dealing with. People just kind of get into it and do what they think is right, but taking that even 5-10 seconds to take a breath, look at what you're dealing with, and then acting on it can completely change how that disaster situation is actually going to affect you. And it may even be the difference between you surviving it and not. So taking that couple of seconds to just
100%.
look at the whole thing, the whole picture, just helps you figure out exactly what it is you're dealing with.
And I mean, like Eric, I was in emergency services for years and years and years, and it just would blow my mind what people would be calling emergency services for. And it's like, and you want us for what? Like, you know, well, my power's been out for an hour. Okay. Police don't drive the trucks, and, you know, I'm sure the firemen have time to go and put your power back on, but they don't usually do that. But it until I got in there and really saw it firsthand, it absolutely blew my mind to the amount of people who, as you say, they have no plan, they have no idea what to do, and they expect that somebody else is going to do it for them, and they expect that person to do it now, not 3 hours from now, or 4 hours from now, or 2 days from now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and imagine that on a scale where you're dealing with like a massive disaster, like a flood, Cat 4 hurricane, you're dealing with a blizzard, that kind of thing. That experience, Jeff, is like this. Now imagine a disaster and it's like this. It's massive because you have an entire population of people who are now calling for a variety of reasons. I would hear people in Louisiana, they'd call 911 and say, I need someone to drive my grandmother to this or that. And we would say, was she ill or whatever? They say, no, she just needs someone to pick her up. There's no taxi services operating. And since you're the government, we expect you to do this because you failed us. I read that in the newspaper. You failed us. You didn't do this with the levies and that with the levies. So you owe me. And I literally thought to myself, I listened to that 911 call over and over again. I thought that tells me so much about somebody who hasn't empowered themselves. They basically said, I'm allowing someone else to run this disaster and design it for me. Why would you do that? You know?
And half of that I'll even say is sometimes there's a little bit of a stigmatism put aside next to, if you plan for any preparedness, right? Like, hey, I buy extra groceries and I stock a little pantry in the basement, right? Like there's a very quick association where you've got a ghillie suit, you've got, 1,000 guns,
tinfoil hat.
200,000, tinfoil hat, 200. You've got an underground bunker. But I'm like, there's that.
Wait a minute. What's wrong with the underground bunker?
Hmm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I know, right? But so all these things, right? Like just saying, like, hey, you know what? Like recently, right around Christmas here, we had a crazy storm. Not too much snow came down, but the snowdrift. I live on a dead end street where I'm like. My winter tires aren't that great because I was like, I ordered a truck. I was like, I'm not going to put $1,000 in tires. I'll just moderate when I drive my vehicle. But I'm like, there was a snowdrift higher than my work truck at the end of my road. I'm like, even if there was something, I wouldn't have been able to go anywhere. I'm like, okay, so it was Christmas. Nothing was open. I wasn't going to do groceries or whatever. Thankfully, no medical emergencies needed to come by. But I'm like, it took like a day and a bit for the plow pass because I'm like, it's Christmas, there's snow everywhere, and I'm just like, so saying I'm prepared for that to happen, there's a strong association with like, you're that crazy guy that I've seen on the internet, and it's almost like we've gone away from normalizing, being prepared for a few days, being okay with being stuck in my house for 2-3 days, with moderate power outage, snow, just really bad weather where I'm like, it's just really crappy to be outside. You can't go get the Starbucks or your Tim Hortons or your McDonald's or whatever it is, right? We've almost taken that normalcy away of being like, I'm comfortable in my house for a few days and I prepare for stuff. It's now the second you say that, right? Everybody thinks tinfoil hat, you're missing a few teeth, and you walk around with a shotgun in your pants, right? Like there's no in between.
You're right, but then that's the same person that when that something emergency happens,
knocking at your door,
where they're coming knocking on your door. They slammed you last week, but now they're coming knocking on your door saying, "Oh, can you help me out?"
Mm-hmm.
I spoke at a conference. It was actually a mobile home conference, and so I spoke on disaster preparedness, just like I did here. And about literally a month or two later, there was a massive wildfire up here in Northern California. Surprise, surprise. And she calls me and says, "Hey, Patrick, can you tell me the best evacuation route? Because I know you live up here. Can you tell me the best ways out of town? What should we be carrying? How do we do this?" And I said, "You want me to do your entire disaster preparedness plan in the next 5 minutes? That's what you want me to do?" Because she's like, "Oh, there's a fire if you, bit away." And I say to people, that's not the time, because now you've let Mother Nature run your disaster program. Now it's in charge. You're not in charge anymore. I say this also, which is what Pierre was actually bringing up, which I thought was interesting, which is that if someone's lifestyle says that, you're going to be in your own house for a few days, if things like working out are important to you, I mean, we're just, to be honest, talking about Starbucks or something. Like if something is like critically important to you, like you have to work out or you start to really have difficulty, then you got to prepare for that. And you have to say, you know what? I have to be prepared with a workout to work out at home. Like that's a part of your disaster program. And if it isn't, you are missing there is a glaring hole in your emergency preparedness plan. So, I guess I'm kind of answering Kyle's question here about most overlooked preparedness for disasters. The most overlooked preparedness for disasters, in my opinion, is your mental health. That's one of the things I tell people all the time. You can be in tremendous physical distress. I mean, I work disasters. Trust me, I slept on more floors than any Marine. I mean, I don't mean that literally, but I slept on tons of floors in parishes, at parish EOCs, at police station floors. When I was actually during Hurricane Sandy, I was actually in Washington, D.C., and I actually slept on a couch in FEMA's headquarters because there was no power, there was no nothing at the house I was living in. Because I wasn't going to stay there permanently. I was just there for a rotation. And I literally was sleeping on the couch in FEMA because I had a preparedness plan and said, that's my alternate site. Hey, FEMA's headquarters. What could be a better alternate site than that? But the most
if they're not prepared, we got big problems.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. If they don't have a backup generator, I think the United States is in real trouble. But the most overlooked preparedness, I think, is evaluating your mental health, which is what we talked about a little earlier with food, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more, which is what is it that keeps you feeling good? Because there's actually an adventurer, a guy named Bear Grylls. I really like him a awful lot. I watched him on TV years ago. And one of the things he used to say is he said, what's the key to surviving, which is staying hopeful. Maintaining hope. That's the biggest thing. And so when I talk about disasters, whatever it is that makes you feel good, that's what you should try to pursue. Because when I work with, for example, I work with a lot of drug rehab places, and when they have to evacuate their site, these are people that may go on the street. And what's the first thing these people are going to do, even though they've been clean for months? You have a massive disaster, they're on the street. It's the first thing they're going to do to cope with the anxiety and stress. They start to use
hit up a pharmacy.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't hit up a pharmacy. Right.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Or call up their local dealer. But what I tell them is I say, if they're in command of their own disaster, you give them a way to take control of their disaster response, then they can continue their lifestyle as they're going. But their mental health is what's going to keep them going. It's what's going to keep them clean. It is such a huge deal that, in fact, we evaluated even down. I have clients where, and I don't advise this. So I don't advise this for everybody. Just this is a limited circumstance. I actually have a client who says, I can't operate without having a glass of red wine every night. And I'm not advising getting drunk. So I don't want somebody who's saying like, hey, Patrick Hardy.
I have a podcast for you.
Exactly. We're going to hop on there. Listen to this guy. He says, get drunk every day. But I just said to him, then get a bottle of red wine and sip a little bit of it. It doesn't mean you have to have a whole glass, but if that is important to you and just the taste of it helps you to feel good, then you know what? Via con Dios, go do it, because that'll really help you in the long run.
Yeah, like I get nervous when I have less than 2 tubs of coffee in the house.
There you go.
Right, but I've been drinking coffee for I don't know how many times, and I'm like, I've tried, or I've skipped the coffee, like, I didn't grab a coffee or whatever, and like 2 o'clock, I got that 2-3 o'clock, I got that pounding headache. You can take as many pills as you want, grab a cup of coffee, 20 minutes later, you're fine. So I'm like, if there's anything for me, I was like, I have at least 1 cup of coffee a day. And if I don't, I get that crazy headache. And it'll probably go away after time. But I'm like, just imagine a disaster having that pounding headache, that Tylenol, Advil, Aleve you've got. You can take as many as you want. It never goes away. So I'm like, no, there's always coffee here. I was like, I'll French press it and drink it cold if need be, right?
There you go.
Like yeah,
like,
I can't. It's that you need that, right? So I'm like,
totally.
That's my thing. There's always coffee.
And I always tell people that recovering from a Category 5 hurricane isn't the time to quit drinking coffee. It isn't the time to stop smoking. No. It isn't the time to stop doing those things to say, oh, you know what, that was the best time. I'm just going to stop drinking coffee. I should have stopped that years ago, because then you're just going to, you're going to be miserable. And then you may even, I've actually had a client one time that did that cold turkey. I actually had to go to a hospital. They had caffeine withdrawal. I don't think I'd ever seen that before where it'd been that severe, but just like you, they've been drinking it for so many years. And then all of a sudden, boom, they didn't have it. And it's, it's the kind of thing where it's like, now's not the time to be stopping.
The elevated stress, and the elevated stress, anxiety, panic, all that on top of like, I'm going to withdraw from caffeine, probably.
Right? Definitely not the time to be doing that.
No,
not the time.
No, it's crazy.
All right. What would be some advice that you would give to seasoned preppers or somebody that thinks they're got their plan rock solid. They know what they're doing. They don't need any more advice. What's something you would tell them?
Write a book.
Right there, you go. Write a book. Read mine. The first thing that I would actually tell them is this: is I say, you know, what's the most overlooked thing I notice? You know, with preppers. I'm not saying this is true with you guys. I'm sure you guys are very well prepared. But one of the things I do tell them is I say, look, I want you to examine your recovery from a perspective of looking at your life as a series of critical processes. This is what I do with small businesses all the time. So, for example, I'll talk to a restaurant and I'll say, your critical processes for you are things like making sure you have raw ingredients, making sure you have your workforce, making sure you have that. What I tell them is I say, and I've worked with seasoned preppers before. I've actually worked with really high net worth clients. I actually have a high net worth client that actually talking about a bunker. This is the coolest bunker I've ever seen. It's actually in an old nuclear silo somewhere in the Midwest. I can't disclose what state, but it's actually an old nuclear silo. And it is tricked out. To say it is tricked out, it is tricked out. And they actually told me once that if I'm able to sell, if my book becomes a bestseller, I go down there, we'll take pictures and throw it on social media because it's so cool. It's got a little swimming pool down there. It's got like a movie theater. It's got all kinds of things. Because to them, regardless of what we think about that, right, as regular people, to them, that's important. Their lifestyle is important, and they have a big company they run. They have massive communication. I mean, Eric, for you and I being ham operators, you got Pierre. You're a ham operator too, right? Oh, you're not.
I eat
Jeff?
ham sandwiches. Yes.
Oh, you have sandwiches as far as you go.
Yeah, that's as far as the ham goes for right now. The sandwich part.
The sandwich.
Yeah, Jeff's an operator.
Oh, does he? Okay, yeah. So, but those ones, I mean, they have tricked out radios. I mean, they've got everything. So even they have we trained, make sure their household staff had at least technician level licenses so that they could at least transmit. And you can't get every band, but in disasters, it usually doesn't even matter. You get band purpose. But the point I was making was that when you're recovering, particularly from a long-term disaster, especially since this prepper culture, I want to use it for everyday people, is I say, look at your life and say, what do I have to have and when, and go to the next level of sophistication. So here's what I say, Jeff. So for example, examine your for example, so let's say you have a person who has to go to therapy. Okay, they were traumatized. They have a lot of triggers, and a disaster. I will tell you this: disasters trigger a ton of people. As a matter of fact, I was talking to some folks over in Turkey, and I'm hoping to be able to assist them in helping to recover the mental health infrastructure over there, because I sit on the UN's public-private partnership, and I'm the small business rep. And one of the things that I was telling them was I was saying these small businesses, there are things you have to look at their critical operations. So with people, if you have someone who has, say, they have to be in therapy, because if they don't, they're in big trouble. So I say, now we need to look at making sure that business because that's what it is. Every therapy office, at least in the United States, these are all businesses. What if your therapist isn't available? What if they go out of business? What if they're not there? Do we have a backup therapist? Do we have someone else we can work with? Do we do telehealth? Do we use the phone? Is that available? Whatever we're able to do. And I ask people to look at themselves in a more in-depth way, particularly for quote longer emergencies, because you guys have got the immediate stuff down. You're ready to go. You got the suture kits. You could do lots of things. But for other folks, maybe who live in larger cities or people like that, doesn't matter. Anything you're dependent on an outside business for, think about that. One of the things that became really interesting, an interesting phenomenon during COVID was prior to COVID, at least in the United States, particularly in California, parents were always saying, gee, it'd be so great if we could have kids home from school more often so we could get lessons here at home. And then during COVID, all the kids were being schooled at home. And these were not people who traditionally homeschooled anybody. I mean, these were kids.
No.
And you know what happened in San Francisco? They literally had a revolt and they recalled the boards, the school board members, because they wouldn't reopen the schools in San Francisco because they wanted the kids to go back to school. They said, please send the kids back. We loved having them here. Please open the schools and get them back. And I said to them, all of a sudden you realize you are now dependent on a school to educate your kids. What if the school isn't there? What if some institution that you have to have operating isn't available? And when you guys are examining things, look back into yourselves and say, what institution am I relying on day to day, month to month, because those are things that if they fail, are they available? I'm actually developing a really sophisticated disaster plan. I'm planning to launch it within a couple months, which is talking about what happens if there's no banks? What if the banks stop working? Like, how does a normal person function when the banks don't work? Because banks get closed during major disasters, right? How do you handle that? So these are the kinds of things that I ask people to evaluate them. And in the book, I don't have time to go into it here, but in my book, I actually lay out exactly how to do that. And you can do it in one sentence. One sentence. There's a way to do it. And I teach you how to construct that one sentence. And in doing so, that will identify every single dependency you have and how to maximize your independence so you're designing your own disaster and not having someone else do it for you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny, right? Like the whole COVID, daughter was at home doing the homeschool thing. I don't know how teachers do it, because I mean, like, there were like 2 kids talking on the computer, and I was like, I can't do this, right? But I mean, even at that point, right? Like we've gotten better, as a household. But the daughter picked up crocheting, right? Just someone showed her how to do a little crochet, so now she's like, hey, I need like $400 worth of supplies because I'm gonna make this 20-foot alligator. And I'm like, let's slow down, right? So a month and a half, 2 months ago, she saw this thing and she was like, I want to make this, so I need this. And I'm like, let's make something start to finish. I was like, make me a ball. I was like, make a ball. I was like, it doesn't have to be a big ball. I was like, I don't care if it's 2 inches round. I was like, start to finish, stuffed, everything. She finally made it tonight. She made the ball. And now she's like, she figured out how to put ears on it, a nose on it. She put eyes on it. And she's already figuring out how to put this, that, and everything. And I'm like, that level and just the thought in her mind of like, I did something, right? Like, she can make a crochet line this big by that big, but she's like, can't do anything else. But she thinks she could do whatever. So I said, I'll go buy $400 worth of yarn. But I was like, you need to do something with it other than it just be sitting around the house, right?
Yep.
Right. So, okay, like I'm like, I don't know how to crochet. I don't know how to sew. I'm like, mother-in-law knows how to do it, so she's helped her. But she'll get to a point where she like passes it off and wants someone else to do it. I was like, that's not how this works. If you want something, but I'm like, the hours of entertainment now that she has made that little thing, I'm like, can save you like a day of like, someone coming up and just be like, TV doesn't work. Where's my Netflix? Where's my show?
Totally.
Right. And that stress on top of a disaster is the last thing you need. So we're going to go to Michael's, we're going to pick up a bunch of yarn, and we're just going to hide it from her. So when something happens, and it's going to be that shiny stuff, right?
I love it.
She's like, oh my God.
Love it. I love it.
But just that, right? Like, so making sure that, if you've got kids and, pets, whatever, we have 2 dogs. So I'm like, maybe we're going to take one of those bones and just cram it full of peanut butter and just put it in the freezer. And when there's a disaster where the dogs are annoying me, here's a bone full of peanut butter. They're not bothering me for 2 hours.
Yep.
Right there. That's the stress off your plate. They're not pacing behind you. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. Just, there you go. They're off in the corner. They're good for 2 hours. I'm like, just doing that, which costs next to nothing. You've probably got a bone or a toy of some sort. Peanut butter is probably already in your cupboard, or almond butter or whatever you've got. Just throw it in your freezer. It takes next to no room. But I'm like, just take it. Alleviating those small little stresses can make a world of difference.
Now, how many government lists or so-called pre-prepared lists do you think balls of yarn would be on a disaster preparedness kit list? I mean, you would say 0, right? But it's on yours
0.
because you identified something really important and said, you know what? I have to have that because that is an important part of her mental health and also just dealing with the stress and hassle and the anxiety that necessarily accompanies some major incident. So I love it. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And right? Because I mean, government. I mean, I'd hate to see what the government pays for a ball of yarn.
The $3,000 hammer, right?
It's a $3,000 ball of yarn. I was like, I just bought it at the dollar store for $3. Like, what are you talking? But that's a whole different thing. But yeah, just right, like figuring out like those little things. I'm like, it was for months. She was like, I really want more. brought her to Michael's,
Nice.
where I'm like, they got that whole aisle of everything, right? And she was like, well, can we get everything? I was like, did you make the ball yet? She's like, nope. Let's get out of here. But I think that
Let's
kind
get
of gave her
outta
an
here.
incentive, right? But it gave her an incentive. So I'm like, and getting them involved in how can they, I don't want to say distract themselves, but if you've got kids, like how can we all work together, right? We can all cook food. We can all cook on the propane outside, on the fire pit or whatever. But I'm like, you still need that time to disassociate. So I'm like, you got to be able to figure out how I can have my time, she can have her time, and everybody, wife, parents, grandparents, kids, you all need that like 5-10 minute break where nobody needs to do whatever. So I'm like, you got to figure out how to just figure that out in your plan. Because if the COVID showed anything, was just like how many people don't like being around kids.
All in their small house.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
definitely true.
Right.
Definitely true. And even the other thing is too, I was just going to say, and then I know we want to move on to other things, but the other thing I was going to say too, which was that the major concept I talk about in the book is that I say, look, when you are evaluating your recovery, look at the things you don't want to recover. There's things you may not want to recover. There are things that you say, you know what? I hate my job. I don't want to work there anymore. And since COVID's going to have me stuck here for the next 3 months, you know what I might as well do? Start finding a new job so I can find something to do. So you know what? I actually have written this in plans before where I've literally said, if the company you are working for stops operating, you're not even going to go back. You're just going to resign. And we actually wrote a resignation letter, years in advance. And we actually wrote it and said, you know what? You're going to resign. You're going to quit. You're going to go find some other job. You're going to start training to do this other thing because I want you to be more successful after the disaster. That's the ultimate purpose of my book. If you were to ask me what's the bottom line, it's I turn to people and say, disaster doesn't have to be one. It can be a success for you. Even if it means your daughter gets hooked on crochet. Awesome. We discovered something. She'll have a lifelong habit for it. That's just unbelievably great. The disaster then wasn't really a disaster. It was actually a success. And preparing for it made us more successful, happier, healthier, etc. And so that's what I tell people, even seasoned preppers. I always say, the one thing I'll ask you in the final solution is this, are you more successful and happy post-disaster or pre-disaster? Because if you're happier afterwards, that means you maximize this experience and you made yourself better than you ever were before. So.
I like it. That's a really good spin on how to look at a disaster situation, of not focusing on the crappy going through it, but how you're going to come out of it better and what you're going to learn from it and how just give you something positive to think about versus getting all wrapped up in the negativity that everybody loves to just latch onto and focus on. But spinning it into a positive experience, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool because I know you're we're going to talk about what led me to write the book itself. I'm sure you're about to ask me that. One of the things is that what led me to write it was because I was delivering trainings to large groups of people, and I was turning to folks, and they were, how it is whenever there's a disaster presentation at work. And they're all worried.
I'm only there for the donuts.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right?
And people are like, I'm just in because I don't have to be at work for a shift. I could just sit for an hour while this guy yaks at me and tells me about all the horrible things we could die of, and I get to go back to work. Good. But what I was doing was people would go into my trainings and literally I would have people laughing. We were having a good time, kind of like we are now, and I was talking to people because I said, you know what, guys, disasters don't have to be doom and gloom. It doesn't have to be blood and guts. You know what? It can be an opportunity for you to see what kind of a leader you can become, not only to other people, but to yourself. What can you do? And I love doing this. I do this exercise at every business because like every time I do a training, I'll run a drill afterwards. Okay. So I'll do 5 or 6 trainings in a row, different shifts. So people will be rotating in and out. Then I'll run a drill and I'll say, okay, we now have to find an incident commander. So we have to find the person who's going to be in charge of this disaster. And you know what always happens? The managers, hands up. The managers always go, me. And I go, you know what? You're sidelined. You're actually going to be victims. And the person I always pick is the person I said, who should be my incident commander? And I always look and scan. And I actually talk about this in the book. I actually scan the crowds.
The one guy that does this.
The one guy that's always
don't
like,
pick me, don't pick me, don't pick me.
I go, hi, you come on up front. He goes, oh, I've only been here 3 days. I said,
Perfect.
Oh, you've only worked here 3 days? Perfect. Great. And people are like, why? And I said, because if your disaster plan doesn't work with the guy who's been there for 3 days, it isn't going to work with the guy who's been there for 3 years or 3 decades. Because every single person needs to pull and access that plan. That's why it's so important. And so I was doing that so often, and I was speaking. I was on a speaking tour. I ended up getting on Good Morning America because I was talking about disaster preparedness, and afterwards people were walking up to me going, "You were like really positive, and this was like a happy experience. You were talking about doom and gloom or death and destruction." And they said, "Would you write a book that talks about how to prepare people for disasters? Just people who live in the modern world, not necessarily people who work in not just in the rural areas, but people who are in the semi-rural areas, people who live in urban areas." Is there some commonality? Because I've worked with families in all of those. I work with a family in Wyoming. They have a ranch in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they're just by themselves. Their preparedness and the preparedness of people I do in New York City, are there similarities? There are. And that's what's in the book. The purpose is what I tell people is I believe that people are being told the wrong things in disasters by governments and by organizations. And you guys understand this far too well, which is why I'm here tonight, because I think you guys are great avatars for this. You don't ever have to experience a disaster in your entire life. That's what I tell people. You never, ever, ever have to experience one, because you can design the disaster the way you want it to be. If you want it to be miserable and terrible, then be a bystander. Stand back, let other people handle it for you, right? That's when disasters occur, because disasters are only what you make of them. You're the only one who can make it a disaster. But when you take responsibility, and I have a model in here I actually talk about so people can actually utilize a specific methodology. And it's not hard. I call it the C3 method. It's not a grandiose title. It's just a simple process you go through in any disaster. And what it does is it lets you reassert control, whether it's equipment, disaster plans, whether it's drills. I talk about all these things. I talk about how to deal with the lights and sirens phase. And in the book, I talk about how to deal with recovery for the very first time. Literally, I wrote a sentence that I was talking about earlier. I call it the one sentence recovery. I literally tell people, this is how you identify what you need to recover in a disaster. Then the final part is what I call reversing disaster, is what I was talking about earlier, which was getting you to be successful. Because I see so many disaster books that always say things like, oh, we're going to get struck by this, or the next hurricane's going to be destructive. My book actually says, hey, there's hurricanes, there's hazmat spills, there's acts of terrorism. None of those are disasters. None of them. They're not. The only way they become a disaster is if you let them. If you don't, then you can be in control of them and design the disaster the way you want to. So I wrote the book because I said, I want this to be shown to a broad audience so people can say, I can handle that too. I can become a seasoned prepper too, no matter where I live or what I do. I can put myself in a position where I can truly be in control of my own disaster response. That's why I wrote it.
That's awesome. I like it. I really like that spin, because everybody is always so focused on doom, gloom, woe is me, worst thing ever. It's going to be a terrible, terrible thing to go through. I like the whole spin on, no, just get through it, build better on the way out, and away you go. That's awesome. I really like that.
Yeah, because everyone's going to deal with obstacles in their life, right? We all deal with obstacles. We all have setbacks. If I were to ask you, one of you, hey, tell me what your biggest setback was. Like, you tell me, well, I got fired from this job, or this happened, or that happened. I could say, okay, how did you become stronger as a result? Because you see, when I run those drills with that person in front, that random person from the back that I pull in front, when they go, oh, I can't do it, by the end of that drill, they find that they can do it. They can actually run the disaster. And then they actually go, this isn't hard at all. And I go, it's not. I'm going to put you in a place to be successful. But if you turn him into a bystander, he's a waste of time, and it's not going to help him or you. So that's awesome. The reason why it's just so important to do that. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I like it. Do we got some time for Jeff's question here?
It's kind of a loaded question, and you don't really have to answer it, but what's the biggest thing that's on your radar right now for what you're seeing going on in the world? And I mean, I'm looking at all kinds of things like in the MPE. Are we going to go to war? Food shortages, cyber attacks, big natural disasters. What is there anything that's kind of in your forefront right now?
Right now, the biggest thing, as a matter of fact, I was in a drill once, and one of the things I was in this training, which I have to do for a recertification I was doing. So I was on the computer and I was typing along, while I was listening to the training. And in the middle of it, without any warning, literally without any warning or anything, somebody walked up to me and slammed my laptop shut. Like when I was still typing on it, he slammed it shut on my fingers while I was still doing it, and he said, close your somebody was screaming in the background, close your laptops, everyone close your laptops. And we started closing all of our laptops, and they forced us to do it, and they turned the lights off, and we're, everyone's disoriented and all that. And he was saying, that's what'll happen if there's an EMP attack. So I want you to think about what that would be like. So what I tell people is I say, do I really worry about any real disasters? I actually don't worry that much, but however, one of the things I do think about is electromagnetic pulse would challenge people the most. Again, it's not something, again, guys, it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. I don't do the blood and guts thing because it doesn't have to be like that. It's the biggest challenge, though, to continuity. And let me explain why. Because most people will make one big mistake. So for the people who are hearing this, don't make this big mistake. Don't make your backups reliant on the same kind of technology or have some kind of resource requirement that if it was absent, your backups don't work. So for example, I had this one time, this guy said, okay, well, I have to be reliant on, in order to get onto, continue to work, I have to have access to a laptop. So I said, okay, well, you don't have to have access to a laptop. You just have to get access to the cloud somehow, right? And he was saying, oh, yeah. And I said, well, so how do you do it? Well, I plug the computer in here. I said, well, what happens if the power goes out? And he goes, well, then I guess I could probably use my cell phone then. And I said, well, what happens if your cell phone goes out? Do you have a way to charge it in your car? Do you have a way to do it? Well, I don't have any other way of doing that. That means that person is tremendously dependent on one thing. He's dependent on immediate electricity in his home. That is the biggest problem. It's not the fact there's going to be a power outage. It's going to be power outages. Power outages everywhere. I mean, but I tell people, as I say, if you're reliant on the outlet in your home, your primary and your backup are now vulnerable to the same problem, right? It's when you have a diversity of things. So when you have those kinds of backups that sort of allow you to tap into those, now that's truly resilient because you're not relying on one particular place. Bunkers are interesting because I always say, if you put food in there, that's great because if something happens to your home, hey, you've got backup food somewhere else. But also think about this too. What happens if you have an emergency in your car? Like I tell people that if you I have I actually have a client I work with. He has a lot of disaster supplies in his trunk because he's driving a ton. He drives 8 hours a week, 9 hours a week just on major freeways in California. And I don't know if you guys have ever driven up and down California at all. It's very, very beautiful, but California is oddly rural. If you've ever been in a lot of places in California, very rural. And there's places where there's no cell phone coverage. So if you're relying on cell phone coverage to handle your emergency response, that's a big problem. Eric, I don't know about you. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, and Jeff too. I carry a handheld. You were talking about the handheld. I carry a handheld. Matter of fact, it's right over here. I have a handheld I take with me wherever I go because if I ever have a problem, and I keep a list of the repeaters. Okay, there you go. I have a list of repeaters I keep, and I know it sounds weird. Hey guys, I know this is totally quote environmentally unfriendly. I keep a printout of the repeaters, and it's in my car. So that I literally, because I can't remember or memorize them, you know what I mean? So I know them. That helps. But if you're totally relying on one particular vulnerability point, that's when people get in trouble. That's why EMPs worries me so much, because so many people are relying on one source, electricity, to do everything for them.
That's a great point. A backup for the backup, but not a backup that is the exact same source or same way of actually utilizing whatever it is you're trying to fix or replace. That's something people always overlook. There's always going to be power. There's always going to be this resource available. And yeah, you're not the only one. I've got printouts of all the repeaters in Ontario that I carry with me in the vehicle as well. They're also programmed into the radio. But if for whatever reason that radio doesn't work anymore or something goes funny, I always have at least 2 with me. Mm-hmm. And
nice.
I've got them printed out. And yeah, I'm a big radio nerd. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sitting here. But
Wow.
it's a couple HFs, some UHF, VHFs, a whole bunch of stuff kicking around here. But yeah,
Well, what's
I carry
interesting-
printouts as well because
That's
Oh,
his
well-
actual backyard behind him.
Nice.
I wish.
That'd be cool. So, well, one of the things I was reading about in the news, which was I was reading this article, which was that there is now a lack of AM radios. They're actually removing AM radios from electric vehicles all over the place. And in fact, by doing that, there's important safety alerts, at least in the US. I'm sure it's true in Canada. As I said, I've never traveled enough there, but they were saying that because of that, people now don't have access to AM radios anymore. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that anybody would even think of doing that. And people always say we need to go bigger, higher, more technology. I talk about that. That's this in the book. I say ham radio operators were the ones who were allowing people to communicate post 9/11. They were the key link for emergency responders because you know where all the radio antennas were in downtown Manhattan for emergency responders? What towers were they on top of? The trade centers.
Yep.
Soon as they were knocked out, somebody said, we need to get the ham operators down here because they are the only ones who can tap the repeaters that are farther away. So they were getting technicians and general class folk to literally help them get access to these bands so that they could communicate on various radios. So I tell people, if you're relying on electricity for all your communication needs or to receive information, you're entirely relying on Elon Musk to give that to you. I think you're going to be very disappointed because now you've handed your disaster response to him.
Right. Yeah, it's all about access to information, right? And quick access is better. And basic technology like AM radio, we all kind of just think, yeah, what are we going to use that for? We're not going to use it for really anything. But in an emergency situation, it might be all you've got. And it is still utilized quite a bit here in Canada as well. So they'll be phasing it out. I don't know. I don't want to get rid of an AM radio.
Well, on top of
But
it, so
I'm
many
ready,
cars
right?
now are just like are basically computers with wheels.
Yep.
You know, Teslas are basically computers with wheels. I mean, if you were to have a massive EMP attack, I was actually kidding around. I was actually doing a disaster plan for a museum, and they had a Model T. Out there, I said, you know what, guys? If we have a massive EMP attack, that will be the best car on the market. If you have a massive EMP, if we go electric vehicle, no, I'm not saying against electric vehicles, but I'm simply saying if you are relying on a computer to handle everything for you, you're driving and all that, what happens if that goes out? Now you're in real trouble. So that's why the AM radio thing, I was shocked when I heard that. I had a couple of ham friends tell me that, and I was reading about it online. Couldn't believe it. That's a big deal because you lose access to that. If you don't have your cell phone, now what do you got? I mean, what do you have? Nothing.
Yeah, nothing really.
Napu.
That's awesome. Any other questions, panelists, live chat? Anything you want to throw in, Patrick, that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, if there's no questions, there's one last thing I wanted to say to everybody. I wanted to share with everyone. I know we went a little over here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'll definitely stick around for the rest of the show. I was just going to say this too. In the end, everyone, I want you to recognize that you can live in harmony with disasters. Chapter 15 of my book, I talk about a tribe in Indonesia, and they have a really interesting philosophy. They live at the base of a volcano. That volcano is an active volcano. It erupts every 5 to 8 years. And the Indonesian authorities, they were really worried about them. So the Indonesian Emergency Management Authority went out to the tribe and said to them, hey, listen, if you would like us to evacuate you and move you to another location long-term to make you more resilient, please tell us, and we will do that. And they gave them a new place to live, and they said, oh, it's all prepared for you. And the villagers refused. And emergency management, where the authorities were like, why wouldn't you want to get away from the volcano? And they said, because we live in harmony with it. We live in harmony with the volcanic eruption. The volcano actually helps us. And they said, how? And they said, because when the volcano spews out ash, that is what fertilizes our crops. That's why we don't have to do crop rotation. When we have a magma flow, it destroys all the parts of the village that we can't destroy ourselves. It helps to defoliate areas of the jungle that we don't have the ability to cut down on our own. Mother Nature does it in a safe, productive way, because then the jungle will then rebuild itself. And so when you are talking about what you guys are dealing with in this, quote, age of disasters, I want to sort of leave you with this, which is if you live in harmony with disasters, don't fight them. Don't panic against them. Don't try to battle against the disasters. If you live in harmony with it and say, this is a challenge that I can overcome, that's how you really design the disaster instead of having the disaster be designed for you.
Awesome. That's a fantastic way of looking at things. Oh, awesome. Thanks again, Patrick. I really, really enjoyed this chat. It's been some really, really good, useful information that I'm sure our listeners are going to enjoy quite thoroughly. The ones that have watched live and the ones that are going to listen to this in audio format in the coming week, I'm sure are going to have a lot more positive outlook on disasters and preparedness. And I hope that they have a second look over their preparedness plan and grab a copy of your book. For those that are watching and those that are listening, I have put a copy of or a link to the book in the live chat here. Patrick's holding up a copy of it now, so you can see what the front cover looks like. And I'll put a link in the show notes as well for the audio listeners. So make sure you check out the show notes section in your podcast player there, and grab the link and check it out. It's a reasonable $40 on Amazon Canada. So absolutely check it out and grab a copy. With that, we will move into the podcast challenge. So your challenge for this episode is review your preparedness plan, update and realign it as required, and of course, grab a copy of Patrick's book, Design Any Disaster. It's like I said, it's on Amazon. I've got the link in the notes now, and it's going to be released Tuesday, March the 7th. Upcoming events, we've got the annual Preppers Meet coming up. It is still July the 6th to the 9th, 2023. Location is same as last year, Desborough, Ontario. Early bird tickets are going on sale April the 2nd. So check out annualpreppersmeet.com. They'll get the ticket sales going there shortly. And as always, fantastic couple of days with like-minded individuals. Everybody's friendly, chatty, willing to share all of their knowledge and experience with seasoned pros and absolute beginners. So make sure you come out and check it out. Last year, there was even a food truck, which I know is contrary to being prepared for emergency situations, but it was good food. And can't
not if
complain
you brought
about
a brick, not if you brought a silver coin with you, because you can get a good poutine.
This is true. All right, Jeff, we got your weather blurb.
Sure we do. So a couple episodes ago, I talked about the breakup of the polar vortex, and it did occur, and there were some immediate results from it for cold weather, but the more long-term results are going to start appearing within the next several weeks. Most models are showing a significant cooling for the middle and southern portion of the U.S. That also means that there could be an alignment of the polar jet. And if that occurs, there's the potential that this colder air may lead to a storm path that basically runs across the upper Midwest of the U.S., through the Great Lakes, and into the upper eastern U.S. and the Maritimes. These models, obviously are models. They could vary. It's difficult to predict weeks in advance. But basically, if this path holds, some areas could see more snow in the next 3 to 4 weeks than they've seen all winter. It's been a bad winter. There hasn't been a lot of storms. There hasn't been a lot of snow. So to say that they're going to see that much snow is, take it for what it's worth. There is a guy I follow quite frequently for weather and stuff. I put a couple links in for, he just puts up some photos of where he believes the weather and the snow is going to fall. So in the longer term, we're talking a 4 to 6 week window from now. The cold air is probably going to start to break. It's going to be spring, and we're going to see a return to warmer air, and that is going to cause some significant or potential for significant severe weather. The clash of the two temperature fronts. You've got the cold front, you've got the warm front coming up from the Gulf, full of the moisture and all that. Lays out a good plan for severe weather. There are some folks, and don't everybody panic all over this. There are some folks talking about pointing to there was a very large tornado outbreak that happened April 3rd and 4th of 1974. And the similarities to the weather then to the weather now are pretty alarming. They're kind of mirroring each other. And I mean, that storm produced 148 tornadoes throughout 13 states in Canada within a 16-hour window. 30 of those tornadoes were considered violent. 6 of them were rated as an F5. 300 people were killed. Over 5,000 were injured. The damage at the time was 1.5 billion. You put that into today's dollars, and you're probably looking about $4 billion worth of damage. Again, is this going to happen? Nobody knows. The potential's there. Like I said, you got that really cold weather, then you get the sudden rush of warm, moist air. You get the squall lines, and that stuff happens. Just be paying attention. Be prepared. And that's it.
Hopefully Patrick's book gets dropped off before this happens, so you can plan accordingly.
Yeah.
I just put my pre-order in, so.
Yeah, so did I.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Awesome. All right, deal of the week. So Cabela's gets the deal of the week this week. Mr. Heater Buddy portable heaters are on sale. They're $119.99, regular $149.99. So check those out because Old Man Winter is still kicking around. All right, any panelists, any shout outs for this week?
Well, I'll definitely shout out Patrick for coming on. It's really tons of good information. I'm really looking forward to having a look at that book for sure.
Same here. Yeah, thanks a lot, Patrick, for coming out and sharing your knowledge with us, and for writing this book. It sounds like it's going to be a fantastic resource for the emergency preparedness community. And yeah, I'm as well looking forward to having it show up here in the mail and having to flip through it.
Thank you all very much, and I'm definitely excited. And if you ever need a guest come back on, I'd love to talk. We'll talk. I got so many stories about small businesses and crazy families, all kinds of stuff. So if you ever need kind of you want a little bit of injection of extra humor, you know where to go. You know where to find me.
You're welcome to come back anytime you'd like, Patrick. We record every Sunday, 9:00 Eastern p.m. Any episode you want to come and chat on, more than welcome. Just pop in, hang out, chat about preparedness. You just let us know. We'll keep you on the mailing list for the show notes. Then you know what we're talking about each week.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and buy a shirt and a patch and I'll start wearing those from now on. How's that?
Awesome. I'll do you one better. I'll just send it to you.
Love it, man. Love it.
Awesome. Well, with that, I will bring episode number 197 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or of course your favorite podcast app. Please help us out. Submit a review. It does help other people find us.
And we do record these shows live on Facebook and YouTube. So if you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast, and click on the notifications tab. That gives you an alert when we are going live. You can contact me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca, or I am frequently on our Discord channel.
You can find me off the wall customizing on all the socialist medias or at Gmail. I have a thing on Discord, but send me a personal message. I don't go on there often. I still got to make a t-shirt for someone. Or you can find me on Monday nights where I talk about why I am a government critique with a lot more whiskey on the Canadian Patriot Podcast on YouTube's at 9:00.
And where can everybody find you, Patrick?
Well, you can find me at americasdisasterplanner.com. Someday I'm going to be called Canadian. I would say I was Canada's disaster planner, but that's really you guys. But I'll just stick with the lower 50. So, but I'm on americasdisasterplanner.com, and I got a brand new site going live on June 1st. I hope I can come back on the show because I got an incredible drill. I think you guys are going to love it. It's going to be a massive drill. We're going to be running near the Bay Area of California, and I would love to come back and promote that. We're going to do it live on social media. There will be drones. It'll be social media. It's going to be run in a way that has been unlike any disaster drill ever run before. So I would look forward to coming back and talking all about it. You'd love it.
Awesome. Yeah, let's get you scheduled up for that, whether you want to do it before or after, during, let me know. We'll get you on, and we'll get you on for all 3 times, whatever works for you to get that promoted.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Love it. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, like I said, we'll bring the episode 197 to an end. You can check me out at rapidsurvival.com. You can get me there on the live chat while buying some prepper gear. You can also email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. So thanks for joining us this evening. Until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.